In Egypt this week, a top trending hashtag on social media asks, does Egypt have any hope left? That question reflects the dramatic changes in Egypt since the heady days in Tahrir Square during the 2011 revolution. Nick Schifrin recently sat down with the author of a new book on what happened to all that hope.
It's been 5 years since the largest state-sponsored massacre since Tiananmen Square, and possibly larger than Tiananmen. On August the 14th, 2013, Egyptian security forces opened fire on a protest tent city in the Rabaa Square area of Cairo. At least 800 were killed. What led to that day was an extraordinary, tumultuous few years in Egypt: the Arab Spring, the coming to power of a Muslim Brotherhood president, a coup, and the emergence of a new soldier strongman, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who clamped down on all aspects of Egyptian society, what New York Times reporter David Kirkpatrick has called "into the hands of the soldiers." That is the name of his new book, and we are pleased to have David with us here today.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks very much. You spent 5 years in Egypt. You arrived just before the 2011 revolution. And it's interesting to read how you admit, actually, you got caught up a little bit in the revolution. Do you think the U.S. got caught up in the revolution a little bit and failed to understand some of the long-term consequences?
It's important to note that the revolution was real, that there was actually a change in power. And for a while in 2011, the military, which had run Egypt for the previous 6 decades or so, was clearly back on its heels, was defensive, was responding in almost a frightened way to the public will. In retrospect, we tend to forget. We say, oh, we fell for the romance of the square. It was all a mirage. It wasn't quite a mirage.
Do you think the U.S. administration understood that? Do you think the U.S. administration at the time understood what to do?
I don't think you could ever really, in retrospect, speak about a single American policy. I think it was always a tug-of-war inside the administration, and a good part of the administration was very, very skeptical of what was happening in Tahrir Square. It didn't really fall for it at all, and was acutely anxious to see Hosni Mubarak leave power.
The lack of unity on U.S. policy continued, of course, and you had a Muslim Brotherhood president, you had an election. Was there disunity in terms of whether to support Mohamed Morsi, who became president of Egypt?
Disunity is putting it mildly. I think there was a great deal of anxiety about what it would mean to see a Muslim brother elected president of Egypt, which is the cornerstone, really, of the American-backed order in the region, especially in the Pentagon. But it's worth knowing that, a few months into power, he stepped in to broker a peace agreement between Hamas and Israel. And at that point, I think he had really won over the administration and showed that he could work with President Obama, that he was not hostile to Israel, and that he could advance the interests of stability around the region. That was probably his apex in American eyes.
As Mohamed Morsi was winning over some U.S. officials, obviously there was some planning going on for a coup. So talk about what was happening in Egypt in terms of the plans for the coup, and then the mixed messages that the U.S. delivered when it heard about those plans.
Certainly, a lot of the bureaucracy in Egypt was hostile to President Morsi, the elected president. That includes all the police, who basically were not doing their job in any respect and watching public security deteriorate. On the American side, as you say, it's mixed messages is really what emerged. When this book gave me a chance to go back and report on what Washington had been doing in the run-up to the coup, you find wildly discordant voices. President Obama, as late as 2 days before Morsi was removed from power, was on the phone with him, counseling him in a very earnest and sincere way about how to stay in office. At the same time, Secretary of State John Kerry made it clear to many in the region that he had pretty much given up on Morsi. Secretary of Defense Hagel, who was assigned by the White House to give stern messages to Sisi not to depose the elected president, was really focusing mainly on building up Sisi and building his trust and reassuring him that America would always have his back.
This may sound like a naive question, but surely when the president gives an order, the administration falls in line. Why the disarray?
I think historians will take a hard look at Obama's leadership style in that respect.
The emergence of military rule that happened was most obviously in the Rabaa massacre. Describe exactly what happened and what led to that.
There's a 6-week period between the coup and the massacre at Rabaa, and I still struggle to explain to people what the atmosphere in Egypt was like at that time. It was a hyper-nationalist hysteria like you've never seen. It's what I imagine it must have been like during the rise of fascism in Europe in the early part of the 20th century, this demonization of the internal enemy. After the removal of President Morsi, his supporters, mostly Islamists, began a sit-in on the model of the Tahrir Square sit-in that forced Hosni Mubarak from power. And they thought that through nonviolent civil disobedience, they could stop the military from taking over. And I believe they sincerely believed that Egyptians would rally to their cause, which they did not. So they had a community there with families even, children, swimming pools, amusements, all through the Ramadan holidays that summer. The massacre was extremely bad. I mean, it's the kind of bloodshed that's hard even to wrap your mind around. I struggled to try to measure it at the time. There was so many people dying all around me, and I had found my way into one hospital at the corner of the square where bodies were coming in, and I thought, how am I possibly going to make sense of this? If I was a better journalist, I probably would have been making note of where they were shot. You know, was the army shooting to kill or not? I decided that I would just make check marks each time a body came in so I could try to track the velocity of the bodies, which of course was hopeless because there were many different places where the bodies were coming in. And when I left, I had a notebook full of check marks, and it was almost no use to try to convey the magnitude of the bloodshed that day. You said 800. The interim prime minister at that time estimated about 1,000. It's a lot of dead bodies in the space of a day.
I wonder if you could zoom out a little bit and look at the arc of Egypt from the hope that so many, including you, including all of us who were there, felt in 2011 to today, to the kind of police state tactics that we've seen. The last time I was there, I couldn't even take out an iPhone and film publicly. What do you make of what's happened to Egypt since 2011?
I personally find it heartbreaking. As we've just discussed, I believe a real revolution took place in 2011, and I believe that it was subsequently crushed. And for the West, I think it's a real lost opportunity to have a more stable government in Egypt, a lost opportunity in terms of political Islam as well, because there was a real debate within the movement and against the movement that was allowed to flourish during those 30 months of freedom that was choked off. And so in many ways, I feel that we will be suffering the consequences of this for a long time to come.
The book is Into the Hands of the Soldiers. David Kirkpatrick, thank you very much.
Good to be here.